All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brendan Fox. I'm the Classical Publications Manager at Leonard. This webinar is Growing Up with Mozart. Our host is Dr. Alexandre Dossin, and he is the Professor of Piano and Chair of the Keyboard Department at the University of Oregon. He's also the Chair of the Oregon Piano Institute, and he has just finished working on this very comprehensive editorial project of a new edition of the complete Mozart piano sonatas in Schirmer Performance Editions. And he was both the editor and also the pianist on the recordings that come with the books. And so we released volumes 1 and 2 of the complete sonatas, and then 4 individual editions of K309, K310, K331, and K545. So we're very excited to hear him talk about this project and what Mozart means to him. So I'll introduce Alexandre, Alex for short.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today and talk about this fascinating multi-year recording and editing project with Leonard as part of its Schirmer Performance Editions series. Mozart has been a part of my life and my repertoire since when I was growing up in Brazil. The first work I remember performing by Mozart was the Fantasy in D minor that I just played at the beginning for you. I was attracted by the varied combinations of lyricism, improvisation, drama, and that the culminating major theme at the end of that fantasy. Mozart also was a concerto that I first performed with orchestra, was 488 in A major, and it remains still one of my favorite concerti and probably the one I played the most. Back in 1995, when I was studying in Moscow at the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, I took the challenge and the opportunity of preparing for the Mozart International Piano Competition in Salzburg, Austria. It was a special trip to go to Salzburg and perform Mozart there, getting to walk the streets where the young Mozart grew up and started his first successes until he left for Vienna. In addition to the third prize in that competition, I received a special prize from the Mozarteum Foundation, which was the complete Mozart Bärenreiter edition. You probably saw those in libraries. They are 20 red, thick volumes with everything that Mozart ever composed. I have that collection in my university, in my office, and every day I look at it and I'm reminded of the genius of Mozart and how much he created in those brief 35 years of life. So that collection of books is still a source of inspiration and knowledge for me, and it's the highlight of my studio library. All of the above came together when many years ago, I was invited by the late Rick Walters to edit and record the new Schirmer Mozart Piano Sonata edition. This is the first such edition by Schirmer since the one by Richard Epstein in the early 20th century, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I always believed that composers should never be put in a labeled box. Yes, they belong to a certain period of history, and performers need to be historically informed in the learning process. However, if we use the fantasy in D minor and as example, we can see that Mozart had a freedom beyond his generation, and that piece has romantic element, has Baroque style improvisation, had, of course, classical style. Therefore, the question of how to perform Mozart begs for a non-dogmatical, a more individualized approach, where each piece becomes its own universe. For example, how can we perform K283 and 310 in the same way? And completely different articulations, completely different drama. How about the romantic start of 282? And compare that to the great orchestral beginning of the C minor sonata. So I don't think that I don't think we can put him in a box. As I started working on this edition, I knew that no matter which choices I made, which suggestions I made, some people will be unhappy. My goal was to create an edition and its companion recording, which would represent my deep love for these works without being dogmatic or believing that it should be my way or the highway. For example, on the issues of ornaments, two of the most respected Mozart performers, scholars in the world, probably Robert Levin and Paul Baduriscotta, and I was fortunate to experience their performances of Mozart live over the years. They both say the same thing, but in different ways. Robert Levin affirms that trills always start on the upper note unless the musical material makes it better to start on the main note. And Paul Baduriscotta believes trills mainly starts on the main note unless they sound better when they start on the upper note. So as you see, is the same thing but said in different ways. And therefore, my approach throughout this edition and the recording project was to find the best way to perform the ornaments by following their natural flow within the melody and the harmony and the contour, the shape, and everything. The indicated fingering in the edition will show whether the trio or the ornaments start on the main note or on the upper note. Speaking about recordings, different recordings of great Mozart performers also show how different the interpretations can be. There are many wonderful recordings of the complete cycle of Mozart sonatas. My favorites are Mitsuko Ushida, Maria João Pires, Alicia de la Rocha, Christoph Eschenbach. Students of the Mozart piano sonatas, in my opinion, should listen to Glenn Gould's recording only after being familiar with the ones above. Having Glenn Gould as the first recording of Mozart sonatas can create confusion. Gould has a very personal and extremely unusual approach to Mozart. This is not the time and place for an in-depth review and discussion of his musical ideas. However, it's safer to allow students a first impression of Mozart that can be inspiring and instructive rather than shocking. I'm also often asked about repeats. Should we take it? Should we not take it? As a rule of thumb, I say repeat only if you have something new to say. Never play the same thing twice. In the years preparing for this project, I programmed Mozart sonatas numerous times in my recitals. I typically take the repeats and started experimenting with ornamentation as I performed the recitals. So I'd like to share with you two examples of this, taken from live performances over the past years. The first one is from a solo recital in Lafayette, Louisiana, and it shows the exposition in the first movement of K330. I'd like for you to listen and notice the subtle differences in the repeat, not only the ornamentation, but voicing and even at times articulation. Some of those were prepared ahead of time, some just happened on the spur of the moment. And the next example comes from a performance in Chicago. And we watch just the theme from K331 with the repeats and some ornamentation. And as you notice, it is not only through the ornaments, but to the voicing also we can do different things in the repeats. And the fun thing is that once we get used to doing that, it becomes just second nature and it becomes almost necessary. I remember a few times playing the exposition for the first time and already almost wanting to put the ornaments because I already could hear them. So I had to finish the exposition, then go back to the repeat, and then I could play all the ornaments that already were wanting to come to life. Another common question I'm asked over and over: which Mozart sonatas should be learned first? Well, because it's my strong belief that no student should learn only one movement from a sonata, I came up with a suggested order of learning, but assumes work on all three movements of each sonata. So I wouldn't suggest that you learn or you give your students a sonata to learn and only learn one of the movements. They always need to be learned completely. One common issue I see is that many teachers introduce their students to Mozart sonatas with 545, with K545. I would avoid that because that sonata is harder than it seems and often suffers from a lack of understanding from young, inexperienced performers. I would also suggest that teachers and students wait a bit before learning Mozart and be very comfortable with composers of the same era, but that are definitely easier musically. So I'll suggest groups of two sonatas at a time. The student can either start with one and continue to the next group right away, or he can work on both before going to the next group. So this is the order I came up with. I would start with the first volume, the first two sonatas, 279 and 280, because they are great examples of Mozart's early period. They are not too demanding technically and also great for practicing cantilena style in the slow movements. Yes, they are longer than 545 and they require more time to learn. But if a student can't yet manage those sonatas, they probably should work longer on other similar composers. Perhaps get really good at Kuhlau, Gurlitt, Diabelli, and Clementi, for example. So I'm going to just play the beginning of the thematic material of those sonatas. So this is K279. And the second movement is very, very lyrical and beautiful for cantilena style. While the third movement is fast and spirited. And the 280, F major, it's very orchestral beginning. With a very, very beautiful and dramatic second movement, Adagio. And the third movement, a very orchestral, light, and humoristic presto. Then we go to the next group, which is the next two sonatas as well. So we start basically following the first six sonatas, but we will go 281, 282. And those can be introduced to students who have an innate sense of lyricism. They are not technically as demanding as the previous group, perhaps, but they do require a minimum level of musical maturity. K282, which I already played a little bit for you in the beginning, starts with a slow movement, and then the tempo goes faster and faster as the movements come along. 281 is longer and more orchestral, starts more lyrical, but then immediately picks up. So this is 281. And then the more orchestral part comes. The second movement, very beautiful in E flat major, also orchestral with duets of instruments. And the third movement is a rondo. And then it continues. This is almost a mini piano concerto in many ways. The second sonata in this group, I already played a bit in the beginning. And as I said, the movements go faster and faster. So we have a minuet for the second movement, actually minuet 1 and 2. And the finale allegro is typical Mozart allegro. So the next group, we go to 283, which is still from the first six, but then we skip number 6 and we go to 311. I think these two sonatas have a bright character and relatively short, slow movements. These are good choices for students with a natural finger dexterity. These sonatas can be tricky at times, but musically they are fairly simple. So number 5, I already played a little bit as well before. And the second movement, slow andante. And another presto. And as you can see, Sonata 311 in D major has similar spirited first movement, allegro con spirito. Second movement, very lyrical and peaceful. And the finale is a rondo allegro. with the next group, we go to 284, which is the 6 sonatas from the first group of sonatas, and 331. And I think those are great introductions to the theme and variations form. K284 ends with a long movement, theme and variations, and 331 starts with theme and variations. Both are relatively long works, with K284 being the longest Mozart sonata. As I mentioned before, let's avoid assigning only one movement, particularly Rondo alla Turca. K331 really deserves to be performed in its entirety. So this is the next group, 284. And the second movement is Rondo and Polonaise. And here is the theme from the third movement, theme and variations. Three 31, you already heard part of it, the theme in from that performance in Chicago, so I will save time and not play it again. And the second movement, we have a similar theme in the C major sonata 309, but in a different rhythm. And needing no introduction, the third movement. Next group is 330 and 332. Those are great examples of Mozart's more mature style after his move to Vienna. K332 is often considered a miniature opera, while K330 has a little bit of everything. The slow movements in these two sonatas are truly in the heart of those pieces. So this is Sonata 330, which you already heard in the previous audio file. So I will save time on this one as well. Second movement. And the third movement is Allegretto. Very orchestral as well. K332. Consider it, as I said, as a miniature opera because of the many different layers and textures offered in this sonata. Second movement comes to us with its own embellishments in the repeat, and they were written by Mozart. And the last movement is a very virtuosic allegro assai. So we go back to group 6 now from those 9 groups. And after exploring the sonatas above, the student will be confident to perform the next two, K333 and K545. At first sight, 545 seems much easier, but don't be fooled by that, because especially when it relates to its third movement. If we can call 332 a miniature opera, 333 could be considered a miniature piano concerto with its own cadenza. So this is 333. Second movement, andante cantabile. And the third movement, which becomes almost a third movement of a piano concerto. And here the orchestra would come. 545 needs no introduction. It's very famous, maybe overplayed, but as I said, is a tricky sonata. The second movement is very beautiful and has some unusual harmonies here and there. And the third movement is a rondo. And now we go to the group 7, where we have 309 and 570. These two sonatas are longer and they are demanding, more technically demanding, musically and technically. K309 starts with that same theme we heard already on 331, but with a different rhythm. And it has a very wonderful lyrical second movement, an extended, well-developed rondo. K570 is more concise and orchestral, with a second movement that looks forward to Beethoven. So this is 309. Second movement. And the rondo, allegretto grazioso. And here is 570 in B flat. With a second movement that reminds us a little bit what Beethoven would do later with perhaps Les Adieux. And the rondo at the end as well, allegretto. And we get now to group 8, which is 533 and 576. These are two of the most difficult Mozart sonatas. K576 is a tour de force with fast scales, arpeggios, imitative writing. And K533 is very unusual in many ways. Second movement has a dramatic middle section with very advanced dissonances, not typically found in music from this era. Both first and the third movement in the sonata are very polyphonic. So this is 533, starts the right hand alone. And the second movement, you can hear some of the harmonies, different harmonies right in the beginning. And the rondo, which was written before but modified and enlarged for this sonata, so it became its own movement of the sonata. And then 576, which is in D major and reminds a little bit 311 in many things. The very lyrical adagio as the second movement. and very playful third movement. And then we get to the final group, which is a group of the two sonatas in minor keys, 4, 5, 7, and 310. The only two sonatas in minor keys, in a way, they mirror the two concerti in minor keys, the D minor 466 and C minor 491. In my opinion, these two sonatas should be the last sonatas one learns by Mozart. The technical demands, coupled with the dramatic rhetoric of these masterworks, require players who are comfortable with most of Mozart sonatas. This is C minor. With a very lyrical adagio. And a very moody and mysterious third movement. And the famous and tragic sonata in A minor, composed in Paris in 1778. With a very lyrical andante cantabile con espressione. And a third movement that is also mysterious, similar in a way to the C minor. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and especially I hope you and your students will have a great time studying the Mozart sonatas. I definitely had a wonderful experience and grew up as a musician in the process. Now let's bring Brandon back to moderate your Q&A.
Thanks so much, Alex. That was really enjoyable. Love your playing and your insights into these pieces. So we have a question right off the bat. Do the books follow the same learning sequence of groups 1 through 9? And I think I can answer that, right? The books are in chronological order by K numbers. But if you need that reference, we do have that handout in the handouts tab that you can download and have Alex's structure with those different groups. And I wanted to mention too, there's a lot of scholarship in here. You've got pages and pages of your performance notes in general and notes on the individual pieces. And I had a question because you start with this great quote from Arthur Schnabel, right? The sonatas of Mozart are unique. They are too easy for children and too difficult for artists. And I just wanted to ask, because I feel like that's kind of been the theme of this, is like re-examining the sonatas, and some are deceptively, easy and some are hard. And just wondering if you have another elaboration on that after this whole project and creating those groups.
Well, this project was a very humbling experience because, as I mentioned in the beginning, I grew up playing Mozart. By the time I was invited to do this project, I had played in concert most of the sonatas already and several other pieces by Mozart. And so I felt very comfortable, and I always enjoyed playing Mozart. But then when the process started, and I started thinking very deeply on what I wanted to say, especially in the recordings, because I never recorded the sonatas before. In my very first CD, I actually recorded Mozart Duport variations. So Mozart was present also in my first CD. And I remember that it was also challenging to record those variations, because when you're playing Mozart, it's not about the right notes anymore. Of course, you're expected to play the right notes, but it's about how you play the intonation of those notes, how you play the voicing. So I completely agree with Schnapp, and that's why I put that in the beginning of the introduction, because they are not as virtuosic, perhaps, as some of the romantic pieces that everybody likes to play. And so that's why sometimes students or players with a smaller technical ability think they can play those pieces. But once you have the technique to play that, that's when the actual work starts. So definitely, yes, they are really, really hard, and there is no end in the process of learning. I'm still learning them, and eventually, actually, I'd like to make organize a full performance of the entire cycle, and then have that recorded as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, the sky is the limit.
Nice. I have a question here. How much pedal do you think is appropriate to use in performance of Mozart?
Yeah, that's a great question and a hard one. Definitely, I never leave my foot off the right pedal, so it's always there when I need it. I tend to dislike when I see players just putting their foot on the ground and not on the pedals, just to say, "Oh, I'm not going to use the pedal." Of course, the pedal has to be used very carefully, and it will depend on the touch. It will depend on the hall where you play. So there is not a easy way to even notate that. That's why I decided not to go that route, because every time you notate pedal in a score, it can be easily misread. And then it sounds bad, and they say, "Oh, it's the editor's fault." So I hopefully the recordings will help, and the recordings will create that sonority that I hear in my head when I play Mozart. But definitely, I do use pedal. Is a very subtle and very refined pedal. Probably rarely going all the way down to the bottom. So is more using those half and quarter and eighth pedals. But it really helps with the overall reverberance of the piece, harmonics, and whatnot.
Yeah. This is not a question, but a comment. Someone says, "I love your tie," and I agree.
Oh,
We all love the tie.
thank you.
And yeah, when we're talking about the recordings, I just want to make sure everyone knows that this is one of our books that comes with online audio access. In the past, you might have had CDs, but this is, you get a code where you can go online and download the complete, these beautiful performances that Alex has made. I've got another question for you. So this publishing project took several years, and over those years, did your approach to a particular sonata change over that timeline? Can you think of one where you kind of changed the most?
It's hard to say. I
Yeah.
think I would play them completely different now. So there is no. That's the hard thing with recordings, is that you put so much thought into it, and you practice so much, and you want to get that ideal, in quotation marks, recording, only to a week later to listen to that and say, "Oh, I want to do it completely different." So they grew a lot over the years. As I mentioned, I performed many of them in concerts in the period when I was getting ready for recording, and I was always experimenting with different ideas, with different tempi. Eventually, of course, when it comes time for the recording, you have to choose and present one of your visions, maybe one of your ideas, but definitely, um, yeah, if I were to perform them again, either in concert or in studio, they would sound much different.
Yeah. Next question. This might be the last one. Can you talk to us about the use of rubato in Mozart sonatas and how it differs from a later romantic rubato?
That's a tough question to elaborate without being in an environment of a lesson or a master class. But yes, it is different in perhaps it's different in the um, dimensions of the rubato. So in a later period, you have more flexibility to do the rubato, and here is going to be very tiny and very subtle. So a great performance of Mozart won't be all over the place in terms of slowing down, accelerando, and all things like that, while at the same time needs to be very sensitive to harmonic moments, to cadences, and also listen carefully for the contour of the melody. We need to remember that those pieces are extremely melodic. They are very operatic in many ways, and singers takes lots of time. You don't if you watch a Mozart opera, singers are free, and they of course they they keep the momentum going, the tempo, and but they need to breathe. They need to take time to say some words. Some vowels are different than others. So I think that when we perform the sonatas, we need to remember that, because it's very easy for us to become typewriters and then just play the notes quite fast and clean, but then we are missing the most important element of for the sonatas, which is the melodic content.
Yeah. Um, Here's one more. Maybe two more. What are differences for performers between Mozart and other composers at the time, like Haydn?
So I would say that yes, there is quite a difference. In my view, I put Haydn more together with Beethoven because of the way they compose and the way they heard music in their heads. So both, excuse me, both Haydn and Beethoven are much more motivic, and that creates a different need for the performer. The motives have to be very well developed and very well thought of in terms of performance, how you are going to articulate, and then be precise and be consistent with that. I feel much more freedom in Mozart because of the operatic quality of it, and the way that Mozart's phrases are always so natural and so beautiful. I The more I played, especially the first volume, the more I started appreciating the simplicity of Mozart's language, and how everything is not labored, is not worked out. So with Beethoven and Haydn, perhaps there is a little bit more of that work out. We know, of course, Beethoven's notebooks and how he would really go for something special and try different possibilities before he came up with motive, while Mozart quite often everything would come just like that, just perfectly formed. So the I think for the performer that should make a difference. So your performance of Mozart needs to be that way.
Okay, we're going to take one more and then wrap it up. This is a pretty specific one. I don't know which book you have on the. Is that volume 1 or volume 2, or do you have both?
I have both here.
Okay, so this is a question about the C minor sonata, 457. What is the best way to execute trills in measure 15 and 63? I don't know if it's the first movement specifically. Keegan, who asked the question.
So this first movement of the C minor?
Yes, I believe so.
So the 15, because it's so fast, I would definitely not repeat the upper note. So I think wouldn't work. You would not want to repeat that F. So you just play the E flat, and depending on your tempo, you may only need. And what was the other measure?
63.
So this one, I think more, again, operatic, and I would start on the main note. So almost like a mordent. Okay. Because again, depending on the tempo, so a faster tempo will definitely make those trills more like mordents, and a slightly slower tempo may allow you to do 2 more rotations.
Cool. Thanks for that little mini piano lesson. That was great. So thanks so much for being here. Really enjoyed it, and hope everyone has a great day.